Welcome to Office Revenge Hub. Sit back and enjoy.
They fired me for speaking up about safety violations that could have killed someone. And the person who signed my termination papers was the same person I'd reported. My name is Alex Rivera. For 7 years, I worked as a quality assurance manager at North Point Manufacturing, a mid-sized industrial equipment company in Ohio. We made components for construction machinery, hydraulic systems, pressure valves, safety mechanisms, the kind of equipment that, if it fails, people die. I started at North Point right out of college with an engineering degree and massive student debt. The job wasn't glamorous, but it was stable. Good benefits, decent pay, a clear path forward if you worked hard and kept your head down. My job was to make sure everything we manufactured met safety standards. Every valve, every seal, with every component had to pass rigorous testing before it left our facility. I signed off on quality reports. I documented test results. I was the last line of defense between our products and the job sites where they'd be used. I took that responsibility seriously, maybe too seriously, according to some people. My boss was a man named Dennis Fletcher. He'd been with North Point for 23 years, worked his way up from the factory floor to VP of operations. He was old school manufacturing. Tough, no nonsense. He cared about hitting production targets and keeping costs down. He had a framed photo on his wall of him shaking hands with the CEO after North Point had its most profitable quarter ever. Dennis and I had a decent relationship at first. He appreciated that I was thorough, that I caught problems before they became disasters. In my first 3 years, I'd identified design flaws that could have resulted in catastrophic failures. I'd stopped shipments that didn't meet spec. I'd probably saved the company millions in liability. But something changed when North Point got acquired by a private equity firm about 4 years into my tenure. New ownership meant new priorities. The CEO who'd built the company retired. The new leadership team came in with one goal: increase profit margins before flipping the company to another buyer. Production quotas went up. Quality control budgets got cut. The testing protocols I'd been following for years were suddenly too time-consuming and inefficient. Dennis started pushing back on my reports. When I flagged components that failed stress tests, while he'd tell me to use discretion or consider the broader business impact. When I insisted on retesting batches that showed inconsistent results, he'd lecture me about production deadlines and customer commitments. I pushed back. Politely at first, I'd explain why certain tests couldn't be skipped, why certain tolerances existed for a reason, why cutting corners on safety wasn't just wrong, it was illegal. Dennis would listen with this tight smile on his face, then tell me I needed to be a team player, that I needed to understand we were all working toward the same goal, but we weren't. My goal was making sure our products didn't kill anyone. His goal was hitting quarterly numbers. The real trouble started about 8 months before I got fired. We had a rush order from a major construction company, my 2,000 hydraulic pressure valves, needed in 6 weeks instead of our usual 12-week timeline. The contract was worth $4.7 million. It was the biggest single order North Point had landed in 2 years. Dennis was thrilled. He pushed the entire production schedule around to prioritize this order. Overtime for everyone. Weekend shifts, all hands on deck. The components started coming through my quality control station in week 4, and immediately I saw problems. The pressure ratings were inconsistent. We'd test 10 valves from the same batch and get readings that varied by up to 15%. That's a huge variance for components that were supposed to perform identically under extreme pressure. Our acceptable variance was 3%. I documented everything, ran additional tests. The problem was clear. The production line was moving too fast. meant the components weren't getting proper curing time. The quality checks that were supposed to happen at 3 different stages were being consolidated into one. I wrote up a formal report, took it to Dennis's office. He read the first page and set it down. "How many are actually failing?" he asked. "About 18% are outside acceptable parameters," I said. "But 82% are passing?" "Dennis, that's not how this works. If we can't guarantee consistent performance across the entire batch, can we retest the ones that failed and pass the ones that meet spec?" He interrupted. "We could, but that doesn't solve the underlying problem, and even the ones that pass are showing higher variance than normal. Under sustained pressure in the field, any of these could fail." Dennis leaned back in his chair. "Alex, I need you to think about what you're suggesting. You want me to tell our biggest customer in 2 years that we can't deliver their order on time because some of the components are showing slightly higher variance than you'd prefer?" "It's not about preference," I said. "It's about safety standards. These valves are going into hydraulic systems on construction equipment. If one fails, the equipment could collapse. People could die. People could also lose their jobs if we lose this contract," Dennis said, "including yours, including mine, including the 200 people on the factory floor who depend on orders like this." "I understand the pressure," I said, "but I can't sign off on components that don't meet safety standards. That's literally my job." Dennis's expression hardened. "Your job is to support the business, not to help us succeed, not to create obstacles that cost us millions in revenue." "My job is to ensure quality and safety," I said firmly. "And I'm telling you these components aren't safe." "You're telling me you think they're not safe," Dennis corrected. "But they're within operational parameters. They work. They'll do the job they're designed to do, at higher risk of failure than our standards allow." We stared at each other across his desk. "I'm going to ask you one more time," Dennis said slowly. "Can you find a way to approve this shipment?" "Not without compromising safety standards." Dennis nodded. "Then I'll find someone who can." He brought in an outside consultant, a guy named Barry, who'd worked in manufacturing for 30 years and now did freelance quality assessments. Barry spent half a day at our facility. He looked at the test data and wrote a report concluding that the variance was within acceptable tolerances for the application. It was bullshit. Barry had been hired to rubber stamp what Dennis wanted. But Dennis had his approval now. The shipment went out. I documented everything, the test results, my objections, the consultant's report. I kept copies of all of it in a personal folder, both digital and physical. Something told me I'd need it. For a few weeks, nothing happened. The customer received their order. Dennis was celebrated in the company newsletter for delivering under an aggressive timeline. He got a bonus. The factory workers got overtime pay. Everyone was happy, except me. I couldn't sleep. I kept imagining those valves in the field, under pressure, starting to fail. I kept imagining a construction crane collapsing because the hydraulic system gave out. Kept seeing the faces of workers who'd be hurt or killed because we'd prioritized profit over safety. 2 months later, my fears became reality. A valve failed on a construction site in Pennsylvania. A mobile crane's hydraulic boom collapsed during operation. The operator was injured, broken back, shattered pelvis. He'd never walk normally again, and a worker on the ground was killed, crushed, 28 years old, left behind a wife and a 6-month-old daughter. The investigation traced the failure back to one of our valves. One of the valves from that rush order. OSHA got involved. So did the company's lawyers. North Point was facing a massive lawsuit, so potentially criminal charges for negligent homicide, if prosecutors could prove we'd knowingly shipped defective products. I thought this was it. This was when my documentation would matter, when someone would finally listen, when doing the right thing would be vindicated. I was called into a meeting with Dennis and 2 people from the legal department. They asked me to walk them through the quality control process for that order. I did. I was honest. I told them about my concerns, about the variance in the test results, about my recommendation not to ship. They took notes, asked detailed questions, seemed genuinely interested in understanding what had happened. Then one of the lawyers asked, "Do you still have copies of your original quality reports from this order?" "Yes," I said. "Now I have complete documentation." The lawyer and Dennis exchanged a look. "We'll need all of that," the lawyer said, "for the investigation. Can you compile everything and send it to us by end of day?" I should have known then, but I was naive. I thought they wanted the truth. I sent them everything. Every test result, every memo, every email where I'd raised concerns, the whole paper trail, showing that I'd warned them and they'd ignored me. 3 days later, I was called into HR. Dennis was there. So was the HR director, a woman named Patricia, who I'd barely ever spoken to, and one of the company lawyers. Patricia got right to it. "Alex, we're terminating your employment effective immediately." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. "What? Why?" "You failed to properly perform your quality control duties," Dennis said. His voice was flat, emotionless. "You signed off on components that didn't meet safety standards. Your negligence directly contributed to a workplace fatality." I couldn't breathe. "That's not what happened. I specifically recommended against shipping those components. I documented everything. You overruled me." "We have no record of that," Patricia said, sliding a folder across the table. "According to our documentation, you approved the shipment. Your signature is on the final quality report." I opened the folder. There was a quality report I'd never seen before, dated the day before the shipment went out. And yes, that was my signature at the bottom, but I'd never signed this document. This wasn't my report. "This is fake," I said. "I never signed this. My actual report recommended against shipping. I sent you all the documentation 3 days ago." "This is the official record," the lawyer said. "And if you're suggesting the company has falsified documents, I'd be very careful. That's a serious accusation." "You're setting me up," I said, and I could hear my voice shaking. "Someone died because you ignored safety protocols, and now you're blaming me for it." "We're terminating you because you failed in your responsibilities," Dennis said. "You're being let go for cause. You'll receive no severance, and frankly, you should be grateful we're not pursuing legal action against you personally." "This is insane," I said. "I did everything right. I followed every protocol. I reported the safety issues. You can't just—" "This meeting is over," Patricia cut me off. "My security will escort you to your desk to collect your personal belongings. You have 15 minutes. I looked at Dennis, the man I'd worked under for 7 years, the man who knew exactly what had happened, who knew I'd tried to stop this. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Security walked me to my desk. Everyone in the office watched. Some people looked confused. Some looked sympathetic. Most looked away. I grabbed my coffee mug, my jacket, a photo of my family. Everything else stayed. I walked out of North Point Manufacturing at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon, unemployed and blamed for a man's death. The next few weeks were a nightmare. I'd been fired for cause, which meant no unemployment benefits. I had about $12,000 in savings. Rent was $1,400 a month. I had student loans, car payments, insurance. I did the math. Now, I had maybe 5 months before I was completely broke, but money wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was the guilt and the rage mixing together until I couldn't tell them apart. A man had died, a 28-year-old father, because North Point had prioritized a deadline over safety, because Dennis had ignored my warnings. and now they were blaming me for it. They'd forged documents to make it look like I'd approved the shipment. I couldn't sleep. I'd lie awake replaying everything, trying to figure out what I could have done differently. Should I have gone over Dennis's head? Should I have refused to work on the order at all? Should I have called OSHA myself before the shipment went out? But I also knew that none of those things would have saved my job. They would have just gotten me fired sooner. I started applying for jobs, but the minute potential employers called North Point for a reference, I'd get rejected. I knew what they were being told, that I'd been terminated for cause, that there were quality control failures under my watch, that I was being investigated in connection with a workplace fatality. None of it was true, but I couldn't prove that. The official record supported their version. My version was just the word of a disgruntled ex-employee. I called a lawyer, explained the situation. He listened to everything, then told me the truth. "This is a tough case," he said. "You'd be going up against a company with deep pockets and an entire legal team. Proving they falsified documents would be extremely difficult without insider testimony. And even if you could prove it, you'd be tied up in litigation for years. Do you have the resources for that?" I didn't. I could barely afford groceries. "My advice?" the lawyer said. "Move on, find a new job, rebuild your career. Fighting this will destroy you financially and emotionally, and you still might lose." I thanked him and hung up. Sat in my apartment staring at the wall. They'd won. They'd killed someone through negligence, framed me for it, and they were going to get away with it because I didn't have the money or power to fight back. That night was the lowest point of my life. I seriously considered giving up, not on living, but on believing that doing the right thing mattered, on believing that integrity meant anything in a world where money and lawyers could rewrite reality. But then I got angry. Really angry, the kind of cold, focused anger that doesn't scream or break things, and the kind that plans. I couldn't beat them in court. I couldn't beat them with money. But maybe I could beat them with the truth. I started documenting everything I could remember. Every conversation with Dennis about the order, every detail of the testing process, every person who'd been involved. I wrote it all down while it was fresh. Then I started researching. Who were the investigators looking into the accident? Who were the journalists covering the story? Who were the regulators with authority over manufacturing safety? I drafted an email, detailed, factual, no emotion, just facts. I explained what had really happened. I attached every piece of documentation I'd kept. Test results, my original reports, email chains showing I'd raised concerns. I sent it to the OSHA investigator assigned to the case. I sent it to the family's lawyer who was suing North Point. I sent it to a journalist at the local paper who'd been covering the accident. Then I waited. For 2 weeks, nothing happened. I started to think my email had been ignored or dismissed as the ravings of a bitter ex-employee. Then the journalist called me. Her name was Michelle Park. She'd been covering manufacturing safety issues for 15 years. She'd seen companies cover up violations before. She believed my story because she'd seen the same pattern dozens of times. "I want to write about this," she said, "but I need more than your documents. I need corroboration. Do you know anyone else at North Point who'd be willing to talk?" I thought about the people I'd worked with. Most of them were too scared to speak up. They had families, mortgages, kids in college. Now, I couldn't blame them, but there was one person, Carlos. He'd worked on the production line for 12 years. He'd been the floor supervisor during that rush order. I'd talked to him about my concerns at the time, and he'd agreed with me. Said the timeline was insane, said corners were being cut. I gave Michelle his contact information, told her he might talk if she approached him carefully. She did, and Carlos, bless him, told her everything. confirmed the rushed timeline, confirmed that quality checks had been skipped, confirmed that he'd heard me raising concerns to Dennis. Michelle spent 3 weeks investigating. She interviewed other workers. She filed FOIA requests for OSHA documents. She built an airtight case. Her article ran on the front page of the Sunday paper. My manufacturing company ignored safety warnings before fatal accident, insiders say. She detailed everything: the rushed order, the failed tests, my warnings, the forged documents, Carlos's testimony. She'd even found 2 other workers willing to speak anonymously. The article went viral locally, then picked up by regional news, then by a few national outlets that covered labour and safety issues. Suddenly, North Point was under a microscope. OSHA expanded their investigation. The prosecuting attorney announced they were exploring criminal charges. The family's lawsuit got stronger. Other construction companies started questioning whether their North Point components were safe. North Point's stock price dropped 23% in a week, and I got a call from the family's lawyer, the one representing the widow of the man who'd been killed. "We'd like you to testify," he said. "Tell the truth about what happened. We're deposing Dennis Fletcher next week. Your testimony could be crucial." I agreed, not for revenge, for justice, for the guy who died, for his family. The deposition was brutal. Dennis's lawyers tried to destroy my credibility, implied I was lying to avoid responsibility, suggested I was bitter about being fired. But I had documentation, emails, test results, time-stamped records, and I had Carlos's testimony backing me up. More importantly, when they deposed Dennis, he couldn't keep his story straight. He contradicted himself, got caught in lies. The forged document started looking obviously forged. Once forensic analysis was done, my signature had been copied and pasted from another document. The case was settling out of court for an undisclosed amount 3 months later. The family got their settlement. OSHA fined North Point $1.8 million for willful safety violations, and the prosecuting attorney filed criminal charges against Dennis Fletcher, personally for evidence tampering and falsification of business records. But I still didn't have a job, and I still had North Point's version of events on my record. That's when things got interesting. A different lawyer contacted me. She specialized in wrongful termination and whistleblower cases. She'd read Michelle's article and thought I had a strong case. "You were fired in retaliation for reporting safety violations," she said. "That's illegal under state and federal whistleblower protection laws. You have documentation proving you raised concerns. We can sue." "I can't afford a lawsuit," I said. "I'll take it on contingency," she said. "I don't get paid unless you win, and based on what I've seen, we're going to win." We sued: wrongful termination, retaliation, defamation, emotional distress. North Point tried to fight it, but their position had become untenable. Michelle's article had exposed everything. The criminal charges against Dennis made them look even worse, and discovery in our lawsuit would force them to turn over internal documents they really didn't want public. They settled 8 months later for $680,000 and a public statement clearing my name and acknowledging I'd properly reported safety concerns. $680,000. After lawyer fees and taxes, I netted about $410,000. But the money wasn't the victory. The statement was, as North Point had to publicly admit I'd done my job correctly, that I'd raised legitimate safety concerns, that my termination was improper. They had to send that statement to every potential employer who'd called them for a reference. My name was cleared, but I still needed work. And I'd realized something during those months of unemployment and litigation. I never wanted to be in a position where speaking up could cost me everything again. I used some of the settlement money to get certified as an independent safety consultant. I set up my own firm, one-person operation at first, just me offering manufacturing safety audits and quality control consulting. I reached out to my network, engineers I'd gone to school with, people I'd met at industry conferences, former colleagues from North Point who'd left before everything went down. My pitch was simple. I'd nearly lost everything for refusing to compromise on safety. That made me someone you could trust to actually tell you the truth about your operation. No rubber stamps, no looking the other way, just honest assessment of your safety protocols and quality controls. It was a hard sell at first. Companies don't like hiring consultants who have a reputation for not backing down. They want people who'll validate what they're already doing. But I found my niche. Smaller manufacturers who genuinely cared about safety, but didn't have the resources for a full-time quality team. Companies that had been burned by safety failures before and wanted to prevent it happening again. Organizations that needed third-party validation for insurance or regulatory purposes. My first client was a small fabrication shop that made industrial shelving. They paid me $3,000 to do a comprehensive safety audit. I found 6 serious violations and a dozen minor ones, gave them a detailed report with recommendations. The owner called me after reading it. I expected him to be angry. Instead, he thanked me. "This is exactly what I needed," he said. "My insurance company has been on me about this stuff, but I didn't know where to start. You've given me a roadmap." He implemented every recommendation. His insurance premiums went down, and he referred me to 3 other companies. Word spread slowly. The guy who'd stood up to North Point. The guy who'd been fired for doing the right thing and fought back. The guy who actually gave a damn about safety. Within a year, I had steady work. Within 2 years, I'd hired 2 other consultants to help handle the workload. Within 3 years, I had a team of 7, and we were doing safety audits and quality consulting for manufacturers across 3 states. The business grew because we had a reputation for uncompromising honesty. We didn't tell clients what they wanted to hear. We told them what they needed to know. And surprisingly, there was a market for that. 4 years after getting fired, my consulting firm was generating $1.2 million in annual revenue. I was making more than I'd ever made at North Point. And I was doing work that actually mattered. Work where speaking up wasn't a liability, it was the entire point. Then I got a LinkedIn message that made me smile. It was from one of North Point's former clients, a construction equipment company. They were looking for a new supplier for hydraulic components because they terminated their relationship with North Point after the safety scandal. Would I be willing to consult on vendor selection and quality standards for their new supplier? I took the meeting. They explained that after the accident and subsequent investigation, they'd completely overhauled their safety requirements for suppliers. They needed someone who understood the industry but wouldn't compromise on standards. "We need someone who'll tell us the truth even when it's inconvenient," the procurement director said. "Your name kept coming up. People said you're difficult but honest." "I prefer uncompromising," I said. She laughed. "Even better." I got the contract. $180,000 over 18 months to help them establish new quality standards and audit potential suppliers. And here's the beautiful irony. One of the companies that applied to be their supplier was North Point. Post-scandal, post-criminal charges against Dennis, they were desperate for new business. I got to review their application, got to audit their current quality control processes, got to ask tough questions about their safety culture and protocols. They didn't pass. I documented multiple areas where their processes still fell short of adequate safety standards. I recommended the client choose a different supplier. My recommendation was accepted. North Point lost a $6 million annual contract. I didn't gloat, didn't send Dennis a message or anything petty like that. Just did my job, objectively, professionally, and in doing so, It cost them another piece of the business they'd sacrificed everything to chase. Dennis Fletcher eventually pleaded guilty to evidence tampering, got 2 years probation, community service, and a fine, lost his job, became essentially unemployable in manufacturing. North Point struggled for another year before being sold to a competitor for parts. The North Point name disappeared entirely. The facility where I'd worked for 7 years was closed and demolished. Meanwhile, my consulting firm kept growing. We expanded into environmental compliance and workplace safety training, hired former OSHA inspectors, built relationships with labor unions, became known as the consultants who actually gave a damn. 5 years after getting fired, I was invited to speak at a manufacturing safety conference, and the topic was building a culture of safety. The irony wasn't lost on me. I told my story, not the whole thing, but enough, about being fired for raising safety concerns, about the retaliation, about building something new from that experience. The companies that thrive aren't the ones that prioritize profit over safety, I told the audience. They're the ones that understand safety is profitable, because accidents cost millions, because lawsuits destroy companies, because workers who trust you to keep them safe are more productive, more loyal, and more engaged. After the talk, people lined up to talk to me. Other quality managers who'd faced similar pressure, engineers who'd been punished for speaking up, whistleblowers who'd lost everything for doing the right thing. I gave them my card, told them my door was always open. I hired 2 of them to join my team because that's what I'd built. A company where speaking up wasn't career suicide, where raising safety concerns was literally your job, where being difficult about standards was a qualification, not a problem. I made it a point to hire people who'd been burned by companies like North Point, people who'd been fired for refusing to compromise, people who understood that safety wasn't optional. We built something special, not just a business, but a culture that proved you could do well by doing right. Last month, I got an email from Carlos, the production supervisor who'd backed up my story to Michelle Park. He'd left North Point after the scandal and had been working at different manufacturing companies, never quite finding the right fit. "I heard you're hiring," he wrote. "Now I know I'm just a floor guy, not a consultant, but I've been thinking about what happened, about that guy who died. I don't want to just shut up and collect a paycheck anymore. I want to be part of something that actually matters." I hired him as our operations manager, gave him equity in the company because he'd risked his job to tell the truth when it mattered. My consulting firm is now 7 years old. We have 23 employees. We work with over 150 manufacturing companies. We've identified safety violations that have prevented countless accidents. We've helped build safety cultures at companies where they'd never existed before. And every time I sign a new contract, every time a client implements our recommendations, every time we prevent an accident that could have happened, I think about that young father in Pennsylvania. Now, the one who died because North Point chose profit over safety. I can't bring him back, but I can make sure his death meant something, that it led to changes that save other lives, that the system that killed him got a little bit better. They fired me for speaking up, for refusing to compromise on safety, for insisting that human lives mattered more than delivery schedules. They thought that would silence me, that I'd slink away too afraid or too broken to cause more trouble. Instead, they gave me a platform. They gave me credibility. They gave me a mission because now my voice carries weight. When I speak at conferences, people listen. When I publish safety recommendations, companies implement them. When I tell clients they need to fix something, they fix it. I speak louder now than I ever could have as a quality manager at a second-rate manufacturing company. Louder than I could have if I'd kept my head down and played along. They tried to bury the truth. They forged documents. They blamed me for their failures. They used their money and lawyers to rewrite reality. But the truth doesn't stay buried. Not if you're willing to fight for it. Not if you're willing to risk everything to tell it. I was fired for speaking up. And my voice got louder. Loud enough that people who think about cutting corners on safety know my name. Loud enough that whistleblowers know they have support. Loud enough that companies understand there's a cost to silencing the people trying to keep others safe. That's my revenge. Not destroying North Point. They did that to themselves. The not punishing Dennis. The legal system handled that. My revenge is building something that makes what they did to me impossible to hide. Building a platform where speaking up is rewarded, not punished. Building a business that proves integrity isn't just morally right. It's profitable. They fired me to protect their bottom line. I built a bottom line that depends on never making the choice they made. And that's a kind of justice no court could deliver. If you've ever been betrayed at work, you're not alone. Where are you watching from right now? Drop it in the comments. Subscribe to Office Revenge Hub for more powerful workplace revenge stories.